Well, greetings all you seekers and travelers, and welcome here to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. You know, integrity is a state of being that implies consistency and wholeness, as well as adherence to a personal code of ethics. When we're in integrity, we are holistically aligned. That is, our thoughts, words, actions, and emotions all tend to be in full alignment with one another, and all pointing in the same direction. Specifically in the direction of who we really are and what we're here to do. And in this way, it really is true that integrity points the way. So my guest today is a comedian, improv instructor, and an award-winning author of her autobiography, Not My Plan, about an unplanned pregnancy in high school that ultimately led her to the path of adoption. She's also a commercial actor, a freelance writer for several Idaho-based magazines, and the creator of Idaho Laugh Fest. So please join me in welcoming one of the most holistically aligned people that I personally know, the lovely Megan Bryant. Thank you, Megan, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's just a pleasure to have you here. You and I have now known each other for, I guess, about a year by now.
Yeah, it feels like about that.
Yeah, and it's been just fun being in your presence and getting to know you. And I was really excited when you said, yes, you'd like to come on this show and talk about integrity, because I think that's, to me, that's one of my most valuable, my highest value, I would say. And it seems to me, judging by what I see, how you show up, it seems to be a pretty high value for you as well. Is that
Absolutely.
True?
Yeah, it's definitely right up there at the tip top, for sure.
So tell me how integrity plays a role in your life.
You know, I actually remember hearing a lot about integrity as a youth. There was a youth group I used to attend, and it was a group of young women, and we had these values that we were being taught in this youth program, and one of them was integrity. And on the surface level, it just seems like you show up and you're honest and you do good things and you try to be a good person. And so I learned it on that really surfacey level when I was young. And then I started to realize as I grew to be a little bit older, how valuable it is to genuinely be that person all the time, especially when people are not looking, because we're alone with ourselves all the time. I mean, we're inside our own brains 100% of the time. Yeah. So only we can know for sure if we're truly living in integrity. And I'm the proudest of myself, and I feel the most on track with what I think my life's purpose is when I'm in integrity, when I'm really being respectful and valuing my own person around the clock. And then, of course, that ripples into everything else that my life touches.
Yeah, that's great. And so you mentioned about the idea of when no one else is looking. And I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, sure, it's easy to show up and tell people and be honest with your word and make sure that your words and your actions are in alignment. But as I said at the beginning, I think it takes more into account. I mean, all your thoughts, all your emotions, all of that stuff that isn't maybe expressed externally also has to be in alignment with who you really are and why you're here. Because if it's not, then you may be thinking one thing and saying another. And that means you are out of integrity with yourself.
Yeah.
If not necessarily with the rest of the world.
Right. And I agree that actually shows up a lot. I don't think that people are doing it intentionally, but a lot of times we sometimes feel like in our effort to connect with people, we approach it maybe the wrong way. We think that we want to say or do the thing that feels right, or what we've been told is right, or that someone else wants to hear. Like, there's a lot of subtleties with the way that humans interact with each other that I don't even think it's always intentional, that we're like, I'm going to suddenly change, step out of myself for a minute. It's sometimes just like we're trying to accommodate others or whatever it is, but then it can start to get a little bit fuzzy on where things really lie, because then we're not able to really deeply connect, I think, if we're not staying in that center of ourselves at all times.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense to me. And what I like about that is you're touching on to another subject, which I think is really important and something that we don't often get to, and that's the subject of shadow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to have another show about that in a couple of weeks, but the idea is we have these thoughts in our heads that say, I have to show up a certain way in order to get people's approval, in order to be accepted in a group, in order to, to connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
And that really isn't true.
Yeah.
I mean, it might seem true in your mind when you're thinking it, and it might even work some of the time. But in the long run, it doesn't work. In the long run, you end up creating relationships with people that are dysfunctional.
Right.
And ultimately painful.
Sure. And you end up burdening yourself with things that are not meant to be in your life, I think. You've known me long enough to know that I'm kind of a nut about yes and with the improv. And for me, that is an actionable verbal tool that helps me keep in alignment with my own integrity, really, and to be respectful of other people. So we all should be able to show up differently and not have it be a negative thing. Mm-hmm. And so that's, I think when I clicked into that, a little bit of an obsession of understanding how to say yes to myself and propel that forward, it's that acknowledgement, right? So you've learned this a little bit because we've participated with some improv activities with me. And when people finally grasp it, that they're like, oh, yes doesn't mean I have to agree with them. It doesn't mean I have to conform with the society things that are being placed in front of me. It doesn't mean I'm saying yes to obligations to put on my calendar. Yes is this vessel that says this is a thing that I acknowledge exists, right or wrong or whatever. That's the thing. And so allowing yourself to live in a yes and state of mind, I think enhances the ability to really be authentic and genuine. You know, those buzzwords that are going around, everyone wants authenticity. But if you find yourself out of alignment with who you are, then people get confused because they're like, well, she posts this way on Facebook, but I saw her at whatever out in public, and that, the energies don't match up and all that. So it's just a really interesting thing to be like, no, there's these ways that we can actually use tools to mentally check in with ourselves and give yes, that acknowledgement for ourselves, and allow other people that same respect and acknowledgement. You and I might not always show up in agreement on everything, but we can certainly have a respectful, safe dialogue about what things formed our opinions up to this point in life.
Yeah. Well, you covered a lot of ground in that little blurb, and it's awesome. The yes and thing to me is a tool for acceptance.
Yeah, absolutely.
And acceptance is one of the primary keys of life mastery in my judgment. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the ones that I've already done an episode on that, and I'll be doing more, I'm sure. Cool. But acceptance is the first step towards really being able to grow.
Yeah.
I can't change anything until I accept what is right now.
Yeah.
And so I can bring my integrity piece into play when I'm making my choices about what it is I want to do and how I want to change things and how I want to move forward.
Yeah.
So that's the important point I think I want to bring in here. So yes, I totally agree with the concept of acceptance. And I also agree that we don't have to agree on everything.
Absolutely.
In fact, failing to agree is sometimes a beautiful thing, because if you don't agree, then true perspectives can start to come out and you can start to see the whole picture rather than your tiny little part of the picture.
Right. Yeah. Well, and what a great thing it is to offer the world around us, to be confident in what we know and what we choose to believe is true for us. Again, I always think of it as like up to this point, because I've had opinions of my own change as I've learned new circumstances.
Absolutely.
And to be empowered by going, oh, now I know something different, and now I can do something different. And it ever increases my understanding that everyone else around us has also had all these different experiences from the time they were born to present day. And so I just love the ability to acknowledge that we all have something to give, something that is really unique to us, even if we do have things that immediately align and other things that are where we could have a little bit of a dialogue, like this is a little bit of friction. Mm-hmm. But I actually really enjoy having conversations with people that know something I don't, or that have had an experience exciting or traumatic or whatever it is, whatever has been part of their story. I love hearing that because I want to understand what's happening in other parts of the world and other homes down the same street I live on. Like, things are so different from person to person, and I think it's just amazing to have that freedom to feel really confident in who I am, and being in that space lets me celebrate other people where they're at.
Yeah.
Even if they don't quite understand where they're at yet, because
Sure.
some people don't have that self-awareness.
That's right.
Which is frustrating sometimes because I want them to feel empowered to be who they are. But, anyway, I keep having little tangents and running on and stuff.
That's fine.
I love dialoguing about this stuff, so I'm really excited to be with you today.
It's no problem at all. I love it. I mean, there's always going to be good gems of wisdom that come out here, no matter whether we stay on topic or not.
Sure.
You know, and I mean, we started out with a particular direction, and we've kind of taken a few detours, but we're still coming back to the same thing.
Yeah, that integrity start point. Maybe we didn't know for sure which way it was going to point.
Exactly. There you go. Exactly.
It's unfolding right.
That's right.
Before our eyes.
And that's the beauty of it.
I love it.
That's the beauty of it. And you know, you mentioned something about changing opinions, and I think this is something that people may not quite understand. You may believe that your belief system over here today is a representation of who you are. And in some sense, that's true. It does reflect who you are or who you're choosing to be in that moment. But bring your time forward to here today and now look at that same set of situations and say, wait a minute, that's not quite how I feel today. Why? Well, I only had so much information back here. I only had so much wisdom, so much experience, and I was making my decision based on that experience and that wisdom. Now I've got a lot more. Yeah. And so it kind of makes sense that my opinions are going to change. My entire belief systems can change.
Sure.
I mean, I know when I was in my 20s, I was a really strong advocate for capital punishment. Very strong advocate. Now I have a completely different perspective on that. I think that people should, take responsibility and have to pay for the crimes that they commit, but I no longer believe in capital punishment. I just think it's wrong to kill people for the purpose of getting even with all the things they've done.
Right.
That is like throwing gas on the fire.
Sure. Yeah, and do we actually get even in that point? When do you know when that shifted for you?
Oh, it shifted probably about 20 years ago.
Okay.
Well, maybe longer. No, I don't remember the circumstance. It was during the time when I was starting to become more aware of who I really am, and starting to think about all these things and realizing, wait a minute, we're all just people.
Yeah.
All of us, no matter what we happen to be doing in this moment, we're all just people doing the best we can with the tools that we have at our disposal. Yeah. And frankly, I think we are all just expressions of love. It may be dysfunctional love, but that's really what's going on. We're all in our own way trying to give or receive love. Yeah. That's ultimately what we're doing.
Yeah, I agree. Well, exactly what you were saying with some of it being dysfunctional and we maybe don't even recognize it. Yeah. Because some people, I feel like, are born into a circumstance that they're not set up for success right from the get-go.
Right.
And they, they might be told that I'm doing this because I love you or whatever, and there's the wrong energy that we would not normally associate with love. Right. And so certainly being able to do that shift and be like, well, the person who committed these murders certainly had a series of events that is worth unpacking to understand how did we get to this point where he's like, this is my choice today, is I'm going to take someone else's life. Right.
And it doesn't mean, I'm not saying that when those people make those choices, they're necessarily thinking, I'm doing this because I want to get love or give love.
Correct.
They're not thinking that at all. It's completely unconscious.
Absolutely.
Right. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you were to go deeper, get down into their psyche and start to understand the pain that they're living with that causes them to behave the way they do, you'll ultimately see that that's what they're trying to do, is they're trying to find a way to heal this pain.
Absolutely. I want to circle back to one of the other things that you mentioned as far as when we're talking about those shifts that can happen with our opinions when we're hearing these bits of information. And now this is something I didn't know. Now this is something I didn't know. In the improv world, when we're performing, when we're learning as performers, we learn to respond to the last thing said. And we're continuously building on those elements within a scene. And I like to see how that translates back to life is like, okay, so if I'm in a scene and the audience is watching and we have the suggestion of rhubarb, great. Okay, so we're doing a scene and then we eventually the dialogue around the scene will go from hopefully finding out what the relationship is about these characters and then what about the rhubarb? Okay, well, if you say, hey, that pie you made last night was so delicious. Boom. Now we know a pie is in play. That's where we're at. That's okay. So if that's true, then what else is true? And then I could respond with, oh, I'm so glad you liked it. I had found my great-great-grandmother's recipe and I wasn't sure of my abilities in the kitchen. So then when you keep adding line after line and then our brains allow the progress when we go, okay, he just said pie. I'm going to accept that and I'm going to build on that. And then the audience comes along on that journey and then they can see the things unfold and they might be like, well, another minute down into the scene when it was the grandmother had died in a tragic plane wreck and they served this pie at her funeral or whatever. Like people will be like, I never would have thought of that. Like, yeah. But if that were the thing that's true, allow it to be that truth. And so I think it's fun that even in the world of play where I spend a lot of my time, it uncovers many truths that are within us, that we want to share these things. We pull from our own influences. A lot of the suggestions for scenes and whatever come from some kind of real frame of reference, a nugget, certainly. Course, yeah. And so you build on it and then we both get to move forward. Even if initially I maybe was going to say, oh, I just finished harvesting the fresh rhubarb out of my garden and maybe I wasn't going to go the pie route. But if I were to block you and then you're like, oh, that was such a great pie. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I didn't make a pie. Then everybody feels disjointed and they're like, well, that doesn't even make sense. But he just said there was a pie. Certainly there was a pie. So if I immediately go, no, there was no pie, then we're stuck. Yeah. And the same is true, obviously, on a much more complicated level in our lives. If someone says something in their truth and we're like, no, you don't get that validation, I'm not hearing that. Like, there's so many things that just tailspin in life that don't have to. Right. If we just could be present and listen to those cues to be like, if that's true, well, what else is true? And then continue to look for ways to build together. That's
an interesting perspective. I remember, well, I've had certain experiences like that in my own life, and I'm sure everybody has. I mean, who hasn't had a mother say, or a father say, that's a really stupid idea, And what happens to the kid when that idea is basically squashed right then and there? Creativity starts to shrivel up. Mm-hmm. The kids lose interest in even expressing ideas in the future. And I know that happened to me, And so I've had to watch myself when I was raising my own kids that I didn't perpetuate that attitude towards my kids. And I'm not going to say that I was completely successful. I mean, I sometimes screwed up. I mean, who doesn't? And so my kids did suffer some pain at my hand because I might have said something like, that was a pretty stupid thing to do, or, something along that line. So it's so easy for us to make that kind of mistake and not even realize we've done it. Yeah. But one thing I can say, and I'm going to say but instead of and. That's okay. But what we have the power to do is to go back and review how we've shown up. And to make a new decision, we can say, oh, I said that to my kid. Wow, I feel bad about that. Right. Well, I can go to my kid, no matter how old my kid is, and I can say, Daddy made a mistake. Daddy said something that was really painful, and I don't want you to think that that's what I believe about you. Yeah. So we have that power. And this is where integrity comes in, because when I know who I really am and I see that I've made a mistake, I can always go back and fix the mistake. Totally. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to think about lately is like, I did an improv workshop with a bunch of high school students. There was about 60 high school students at a young women's leadership conference down at the university here. And they were just jumping right in with these activities, very easily stepping into that creative space of play. They're still young and relatively untarnished in some ways. They haven't yet maybe been defeated by society trying to crush their dreams yet.
And afterward, a few of these young ladies said, man, my parents need to have one of your workshops. And then they were like, yeah, mine too. And I just was thinking, man, I don't think that that's a negative thing. I think they're just like, ooh, they just felt something. They're like, ooh, they just saw me. I'm old enough to be their mother. And so for them to see those connections of like, look, once we learn that we could do something better, I think that's a beautiful thing to say, whoa, I was wrong. I recognize that what I did was hurtful. Mm-hmm. I did it, and maybe we can explain why we did it, not necessarily because we're trying to justify doing wrong things, because I think there's a fine line there too. Mm-hmm. But that's a powerful use of integrity to be able to go, oh, okay, yeah. And then to go back to your child and be like, you know what? I tried to steer you too much to have the things I didn't have, or whatever the thing is.
Right.
And what an example that sets for then the next generation.
Absolutely.
To break the cycles, as some of the cycles people are in are really, really dangerous and emotionally and physically dangerous. Others are less easy to dial in on, but there's certainly different cycles that we perpetuate. Yeah. And so I think that that's a great tool then for that new generation to go, oh, wow. I don't respect my parent any less because they said, I'm sorry. In fact, they will respect even more and be
that
like,
is exactly what I wanted to bring on. I'm glad you said that, because
we're on the same.
Absolutely. I believe we mistakenly think, and this is our ego minds coming into play, we mistakenly think that if we admit to making a mistake, that makes us look weak. Mm-hmm. That makes us look defective. It makes us look broken. Our ego minds are really, really good at creating those stories. And so what happens is we put that stuff in the background and it becomes shadow. And we're going to talk about that another time, as I said. But the idea is, if you can get back into connection with who you really are, and you can understand that what I am doing here is I'm trying to show up as a real, loving human being. Mm-hmm. What better way for me to do that than to approach people, whether it's a child, my own child, or whether it's a friend or someone you're in a relationship with, it doesn't matter who it is, and just say, I made a mistake. Yeah. And I just want to own it, and I want to talk to you about it, and I want to see if there's a way for us to come to some healing, sure, however that looks. Mm-hmm. The person who receives that from you is going to see you as a much bigger and stronger person than the one who refuses to even acknowledge the mistake in the first place. Yeah. So let that be an opportunity to shine. Let that be an opportunity to really come into alignment with who you really are.
Yes.
And
there's always an and. Yeah, I just love that. There's things I think we've been trained to be like, like we're not allowed to feel certain ways, and maybe we're embarrassed because we've done something foolish and we don't even want to talk about it, but there's just so much freedom. I mean, I physically feel like relief when I've said I'm sorry about something, or if I've taken ownership over something. And then just as much as I think it's empowering to acknowledge those things, it makes me feel more okay with being super proud of myself when I do something awesome.
Right.
Because a lot of times too, we don't know how to step into the power of like, I'm a really good mom, and I had this really great experience, or I accomplished this really difficult task.
Yeah, that's great. Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we get stuck in thinking that we're bragging or pride or whatever. And I think that is actually something that if we can be as aware of the things that we're improving on, when we have something awesome happen, then we should be able to celebrate it without it having a negative effect.
I agree with that 100%. The way I like to think of it is, if I own the magnificence of something that I have done or of who I am, that's not the same as expecting you to worship me for having achieved something.
For sure. Yeah.
And that second energy, by the way, that's all ego. Mm-hmm. That's all that is. If I'm simply owning who I am and just taking ownership of all the good things that I do, I think that can be seen as being just, I'm in integrity with who I am.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, I'm sorry. That's your choice not to like it.
Right.
You know?
And what in the heck are we even fighting for if we're not looking for those victories too?
Exactly.
To be like, okay, yeah, if I didn't feel like I got to celebrate those things, what's the point of even, then maybe that's why some people don't care about integrity, or they're not thinking about it. If they're like, I never win at things, or I always suck at this, or I'm not athletic, or I'm not, we constantly are like, I don't have this thing, or look at that person's career trajectory, or whatever these things are. We're constantly looking at what we don't have and the lack or the failures, which failure to me is not, that's like a whole other thing in itself. It's not a bad thing.
No,
like we're simply trying something to find out if it works or not. And if not, okay, now we know, now we try this other thing. And I just think that all of these things come in full circle to really be able to go, yeah, this is me. Now, if I know I can accomplish this thing, and if I can look at my kids and see that they're happy and well adjusted and they still know that they're loved and safe, even if I yelled because there was yogurt massage all over the table after 5 seconds of being out of the room, and they still feel safe with me, like I can see those things, and then I'm like, yeah. So I will dialogue with myself quite often, especially if I feel myself slipping into a funk. I will tell myself the things that I am doing well.
Good for you.
And I will express verbally out loud, sometimes into a mirror. Like sometimes you need to look at yourself and go, you know what? You're okay. You are smart. Mm-hmm. You have a functioning brain. You have hands that can lift things. Like sometimes it's those beautiful, very little things. Yeah. To be like, look at all these things that we have. Mm-hmm. And I made a dinner that didn't suck. Whatever the thing is, sometimes they're very small. They might be real small victories, but other times it might be like, I had an incredible comedy show last night, and I looked in the audience and I saw people smiling and I heard them laughing. That means I did my job. I did my job well. Mm-hmm. I showed up and I delivered. And if I remind myself of those things, it helps me get out of the funk quicker. I let myself be in a funk sometimes, but then I don't stay there very long because that's no good to anyone.
Yeah, you'll stay there as long as you don't need to stay there anymore. Totally. I mean, until you know what I mean.
Yeah.
There's one thing I do want to talk about, and that is how, first of all, there isn't a person on this planet who isn't out of integrity sometimes. Mm-hmm. We all slip up. And I think because of our ego minds, we may resist the idea of trying to find a way of getting ourselves back into integrity. Well, I'd like to share with you a little bit of a tool that you can use. And it's called accountability, self-accountability. And the way this works is, first of all, I look at, it's usually some kind of an agreement or a commitment that I've broken. And it might be an agreement to myself or a commitment to myself. It might have been a verbal commitment that I made with somebody else. But whatever it is, I know that I'm out of alignment with something in relationship to another person or even just to myself. When I see that, when I become aware of it, I don't think it's sufficient to simply go and apologize. Mm-hmm. I think that apology is nice, but sometimes apologies are very shallow and they just don't, especially when the same apology keeps happening over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you got to go deeper than the apology. And when I go deeper, what I look at is, okay, what was the agreement that I broke? And what were the choices that I made that got me out of integrity with that agreement? What was it that I chose to do instead of honoring that agreement? Because whether I made the choice consciously or not, it was still a choice. Mm. And maybe it's something like I was supposed to meet you for dinner someplace, and I was supposed to be there at 6:00, let's say. Well, what happens if I showed up at 6:30? Well, during that 30 minutes, you're probably sitting there wondering, where the hell is this guy? What's going on? Has he been in a car accident? I mean, all kinds of thoughts are going to go on in your mind. Meanwhile, I'm still at work doing something because, I thought I had to do one more thing. One more thing because otherwise I'm not going to please my boss. So you see what's happening is my own shadow behavior is starting to come in, and it's getting in the way of me being in integrity with you. Mm. Now, if I just show up and at the thing and say, "Oh, sorry, I'm late. Traffic." I'll give you some lame excuse, or the boss made me stay late. Right. You're going to say, "Oh, okay. You're going to let me off once." If it starts happening again, no more. If I don't take ownership in that and I tell you, here's the real truth. I was working and I decided to take on one extra task that took longer than I thought it was going to take. And I failed to call you and let you know that I was doing this. I let my approval shadow, trying to get my boss's approval, get in the way of being in integrity with you. Now, you might still be a little upset about that, but at least now you know some truth about me and you know, oh, so this guy has those little shadows too, because I know I sometimes want to get approval.
Right.
So you see, the beauty of that is it creates connection instead of creating division.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of the accountability process. It doesn't mean I'm letting myself off the hook. It doesn't mean you're letting me off the hook. It means that we are honestly dialoguing about the situation.
Right.
And the beauty of it is, after it's all done, I can say to you, okay, I'm going to make a new commitment. My commitment now is not about being on time with you. My commitment is about doing some work so that I don't keep letting that shadow run my life. And I want you to be my accountability partner on that because this affected our relationship.
Right.
You see? And so you can check in with me every once in a while and say, so how's that approval shadow thing going?
Yeah, interesting.
You know, it's a beautiful, beautiful way of getting myself back into integrity by creating a new agreement that puts me in the face of my shadow and allows me to struggle a little bit with that and maybe get some support from somebody who cares about me.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
And it strengthens our relationship.
Right. Well, and meeting it there with that truth. It has a different energy, I think, than having those excuses.
Correct. And you notice in my process, I never actually said, I'm sorry. I didn't have to. Sure. You get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I can say, I am sorry I'm late. I know that you were probably worried about me and blah, blah, blah. And these are the impacts of the choices I made.
Sure.
It's a powerful tool.
Yeah. I like it.
It's a good tool, and I use it for myself all the time. And I've done a lot of men's work, particularly, and I've had men learn it. I've had women learn it in my other groups.
Yeah,
powerful tool.
I love it. I love accountability.
Accountability, not the kind of accountability they talk about in politics.
Sure.
Yeah,
right.
We're talking about real accountability.
Yeah, we don't have enough time in this episode to get into that kind of
No, we don't have to have that time. And so I guess I'd like to come up with a really nice closing sequence here.
I was going to do a musical number. No, I'm just kidding.
Perfect. I can go get my guitars.
Woo!
So, just something to close up. What's the real nugget that we can share with our audience to let them, go home with something and just mull it over?
Just one singular nugget, eh? I think I like some of the words we had in here. We had acceptance because of the yes and, integrity, we have accountability. I'm trying to think, how do we marry all of those things together? It's almost like giving yourself the permission to be better without looking for someone else's approval to do so.
That's nice. I like that. Yeah. I think more than permission, supporting yourself in every step of the way to just be who you really are in every single moment. Because no one else can do it for you. And you might as well be yourself because everyone else is taken. That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
And somebody made a joke about that. I can't remember who it was, but anyway, maybe I just did.
I don't think it right after. I think actually just bringing it back to your word of accountability.
Yeah. Being
accountable to yourself is very important. Like I am self-employed. You are self-employed. Sometimes tasks don't get done unless, like this is a very basic example, but like I put deadlines on things because they don't get done otherwise. And I used to feel like I wasn't at a regular job, and so what's the point of I don't have to hold myself as accountable, but in fact I have to hold myself more accountable because I'm relying on myself to make sure there's a deliverable. And so that's true for me personally and professionally. I think when you're holding yourself accountable to doing your best, to showing up, to making changes you want to, a lot of these things we talked about, to be accountable, to maintain your integrity, all the time, as all the time as possible. As most of the time, the words aren't coming out.
No, I like it. I would say
words are
to
hard.
be in integrity all the time.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Because, like it or not, you are always showing up as who you really are.
Mm.
The thing is, your ego mind might be getting in the way, and so, it's hard not to be who you are.
Yeah.
Okay? But so don't pretend to be
Yeah.
something else. That's the key.
Right.
And if you catch yourself, cool.
Yeah.
Be gentle, loving, kind of like a kid, I love you. You're so delicious and delightful and juicy. And when you make mistakes, I love you even more. Because that just proves your humanity, and it lets me see the beauty and the magnificence that's deep within you.
Right.
So say that to yourself.
Yes. Seriously, like actually out loud.
Yeah,
say
all the
to
time.
yourself.
Say it to yourself all the time.
Mhm.
And so this has been awesome.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
It's been great.
I'm glad you had me.
Well, I'm glad you came in. I mean, this is I love this whole notion of life mastery. But life mastery isn't a destination.
Right.
Okay, life mastery is a process. And so, I'm going to keep bringing people in. We're going to keep talking about stuff. We're going to keep sharing new ideas, and we're going to keep learning and keep growing. So I want to thank you for participating in today's program. I want to remind you that you can find recordings of this and every other program that I've ever done at my website at lifemasterytv.com. That's life-mastery-tv.com. So I'm going to remind you as you go through your week to keep the life mastery mantra in the top of your mind. And that is, gratefully forgive the imperfect being you have been in the past. Gratefully accept the magnificent being you are right now. And gratefully welcome the evolved being you are becoming in each new moment. Love, light, and blessings to you on your journey. Bye-bye for now.
Love it.
Okay.